Our next speaker is going to follow a similar format where he's going to come up and do a short presentation, and then we'll be joined to give a fireside. By way of introduction, he's the founder of KIProtect. He is a privacy engineer, previously with DuckDuckGo, and holds a PhD in quantum physics. Please welcome me and join to the stage Andreas Dewes.
All right, yeah. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here today, so thanks for the invitation as well. The work I'm presenting today is from 2016. It was originally presented at the Chaos Communication Congress. We had the title Build Your Own NSA back then, which in 2016 was quite ambitious, a bit less today. So I also kept this title, and I'm going to revisit a bit the work and put it into context of the current data landscape, so to say. And to start off, the person who really pioneered and led this work, which allows me to show you all of this today, Svea Eckert. She's a journalist for the NDR, the Northern German Broadcast Corporation, and she did a lot of really brilliant investigative work for German news formats, and we really have to thank her and all of her team for pushing this, and I was, so to say, more like the data nerd. I knew Svea from the Chaos Communication Congress as well, and she took me onto this work as a data scientist to help with de-anonymizing all of the data. And so a little bit of background. In 2016, and of course still today, there are tons of data brokers that offer various types of personal information, personal data, for marketing and other purposes. So they tell you that they can basically enrich your own data, help you to predict what people will like, and give you all kinds of information that you can use to market your products or position your services. And when you ask these companies if everything is privacy friendly and if they obey all of the privacy laws, then they of course say yes, of course, don't worry, we really care about your privacy, everything is fine. But it's surprisingly hard to actually see what kind of data they're processing and what they do with that data. And Svea really wanted to shed a bit of light on that and see what kind of data actually gets collected there, how the data gets used, and if that's all really what it seems to be on the surface. And so we set out to acquire a sample of such personal data and then see what we would find in there and if we could actually de-anonymize it. And of course, as you can imagine, these companies aren't too keen on just giving out this data and letting you do whatever you want with that because they have large compliance risks and reputational risks. And normally it's almost impossible to get your hands on this data, but the great thing about journalism, at least in Europe and many other parts of the world, is that journalists can do things that would otherwise be totally illegal. So in order to acquire and shed some light on things that would otherwise be hidden. And what Svea did then is, as a first step, to just set up a marketing website with a website builder, meets technology, a hip startup from Germany doing marketing tech, selling insights and working with big brands in Germany like Otto and other big companies. So everything, of course, completely fictitious and not real, but made to impress the data brokers so that they would give us some data. And to go along with that, she set up a fictitious persona on social media, so had a LinkedIn profile set up with all of the relevant information, and was then ready to actually go out and try to get her hands on some of that data. And the first step was to just think about where could one actually start, or which companies would actually provide access to such data, because the marketing tech landscape here, so this overview is from 2016. I think today it would be way more complicated still, but there are a lot of companies that broker such data, and basically these so-called audience and market data and data enhancement companies were the ones that we were targeting and which would have this data that we would be interested in. And so what followed was a very long and arduous process of like talking to people, having lots of meetings, and of course going through due diligence, often resulting in us not getting any data because already back then the companies were keeping their hands tight on this data, of course. But after many, many months, we finally got one company that gave us access to sample data, so we're really excited about that. Transferred all of the data as good data scientists would do. We transferred all of the data immediately to a server. I think then afterwards they noticed that something was up, so they shut us down, but we finally had some real personal data that we could work with, that we could analyze. And what they gave us was a sample, so a small sample, they said, from data, so-called clickstream data from the German market. And this data contains basically 3 billion URLs. So just like a website, when you open a website in your browser, the URL gets saved to this data set from around 3 million users, specifically from the German region. So not, for us, for me, a very large data set, but for them, it was just a sample. So it contained the data of, I think, 2 months of browsing history. And to give you a better idea of how this data looked, I have here a sample. We anonymized the data, or de-identified it as much as possible here. So like all of the little X's that you're seeing are actually added by Svea. The actual data that we got was completely or almost completely uncensored, so we could see the full URL. And you can see, so this here, for example, is the data of one person. And you can see as they go along their day, how they browse the internet, and every URL that they open, every page navigation that they do in their web browser is recorded in here in this one list. And you can see, so this person is actually from the German police force because we could identify them. You can see, like in the beginning of the day, they just do some web browsing. They look at news websites, for example. They also go to their mobile phone provider. They go to the German police union website as well. They go to their banking website. And they basically, you can follow this person as if you would sit directly behind their screen and see whatever they're doing on the web browser. And so the first step, of course, to see if we could de-anonymize this data and find out who that person is to look at direct ways of information or direct identifiers in the data. And sure enough, we found something here because you can imagine if you're working in a police force, you're on cybercrime, in a cybercrime unit, you have to write messages to people asking about information. Sometimes you need to do this in English, and if your English, like mine, isn't maybe top-notch, then you can just use a translation tool like Google Translate to have a text translated. And this is what this person here did. So they used Google Translate to translate the law text or an email. And Google Translate puts that whole text in the URL bar, so in the end, it ends up in this data set here. And what we can do, we can just extract this data, and then we could, in this case, find this email here, which the person translated, which contained lots of personal information about a criminal court case, and the name of the police officer in this case. So in this case here, this information alone was already enough to identify that person uniquely because we had all of the information already inside the URL. So in that sense, we could already prove that this data is not really anonymous as the company claimed and contains really, really sensitive and personal information that can be easily extracted as well. So, and that works, of course, with other types of information as well. So we can, people use social media accounts. So, for example, Twitter, which I no longer use, but did back then, will put your username in the URL bar. So if you visit the Twitter website and with your profile being logged in, then you can also simply extract that from the data set. So all of the users of the Twitter, for example, or other social media websites like Sing, which is the German equivalent to LinkedIn, can be easily identified if you extract these URLs from the data. And this also worked for a lot of different websites, so we could re-identify, again, large portions of the users and put real names or at least pseudonymous names on them in many cases. So again, this kind of data is very risky and can be easily re-identified and put together with an existing person. Now, maybe a bit more interesting question for me as a data scientist or privacy engineer is, can you actually also de-anonymize the data if you don't have these kind of direct identifiers in there? So if you're not lucky enough to find a name or an email address or a handle in the URL that directly relates the data to a real person. And it's actually an interesting question. I've been working on this or around this topic for, I would say, like almost the last 10 years. And the way I see it is that, if you have like a different user or a person, so anyone like us, we have like lots of different attributes, like my age, my gender, where I'm born, where I grew up. You can represent all of that information as these little squares here, so like binary attributes, yes, no attributes, and can say, okay, Andreas, he's from Germany. That would be a yes for this attribute. He's living in Berlin, for example. That would be a yes here. And so like all of the information about a person can be summarized here, in such a vector, so to say, of like these different attributes. And if you take, of course, all of the information about a person, then like this vector will be very, very unique, So there's very little chance that there's another person who has like exactly the same combination of attributes as you. And the interesting thing about this is that it works for any kind of like information. It doesn't matter if it's like birth date, where you grew up or so, or if it's like clickstream data, so which websites you visit, because there's in almost all of the activities we do, there are like characteristic attributes or habits that are unique to a given person. For example, if I browse the web, I have like my news sites that I regularly go to, like Ars Technica, Spiegel Online, for example. I have my online banking site. I have my phone provider site. I have some social media sites, maybe some niche blogs which I visit. And this combination of domains will also be quite unique for myself as a person. So there's a very little chance that another person has exactly the same preferences or interests when browsing the web. And now, if you have like anonymous data, for example, about this clickstream data that we have, and you have all of that information about the domains, for example, that people visit, you can ask yourselves, is it possible now to identify a person, a real person that this data here belongs to? And in order to do that, you need to combine this data with another data set that you have. So this could be public data or really any data that is available to you that contains a so-called direct identifier. So we need some data that contains, for example, my name or a way to relate the data to a specific person. And now what I can do, if I have some of these attributes, both in the anonymous data set and in the publicly or available information to me, I can just match these attributes. I can say, okay, I know this person has a yes value for this attribute and two no values for these attributes. So I can just look in my anonymous data and can see, okay, does that match with any row or any entry I have there? And often that's really like this technique is working surprisingly well, and it's very easy to apply as well. If you have enough attributes, then always or almost always it works so that you can eliminate all of the rows in the anonymous data set except one row that then with high likelihood belongs to the user, which public information you have. So in that sense, you have de-anonymized that person or re-identified that person just using public information and the anonymous data that you have at hand. So it's really like a very simple technique, just like comparing attribute values on the left side, on the right side, but it works in surprisingly well in all possible circumstances. So it's really, that's also like the core problem why it's so hard to like have really anonymous data, because it's, information theory or the statistics just works against you. And the more attributes you have, the more data you publish, the easier it will be to apply this technique to the data set. And in our data set, for example, we have, as I said, like domain information, so different domain names, and we can see how well this would actually work to re-identify a given user. And if we see, for example, how many users have visited a given combination of domains, we can see how well this is actually working with just a few bits of information. So what I show you here is like a collection of 1 million users that we have selected from the data set. And we see now, as I add different websites that these people visit, how many users remain in the data set that have visited at least 2 or 3 or 4 of these websites. So we start with 1 million users, and you can see if we like use this very popular GOG gaming website, then that already narrows down the pool of users to 15,000 that remain only. So only 15,000 users in the data set visited this website. And if we then, for example, say, okay, maybe let's see, I know this person is using Deutsche Telekom, so they go to the Kundencenter telekom.de, then that narrows down the number of possible users to already 367. So already like, 100,000 users less almost, And if you then say, okay, maybe this person is a Kunde at Sparda Bank, so like a German bank, then it's only 11 people that have visited the combination of these 3 websites. And then, okay, the last remaining bit is saying, okay, this person reads Handelsblatt, and then if you have like these 4 pieces of information, then there's only one person in the whole data set of these 1 million people that fits this description, you know? So even with such simple information, the filtering effect is very, very dramatic. You know, you might remember this game, asking yes/no questions to find out who is like a popular person, and this is basically the same thing. You know, even in a vast pool of millions of people, like a few of these attributes are enough to identify almost anyone. And with our data, we wanted, of course, to know, is this only an abstract possibility, or would this actually work? And what we did is we used the data that we had, like so the existing clickstream data of users, and we saw where could we get some public information that we could match it to make our de-anonymization scheme work. And what we did at first is to use Twitter data. So Twitter, well, now X, is a popular social media network. And what people, of course, do on Twitter is to tweet about the websites that they visit. And often you would think, okay, if someone tweets about a website, then they would probably have visited that website shortly before. You know, so we could say, okay, in our data set, we could just look at the public profile of users, then extract the tweets, which was possible through the API very easily back then. Not so easy anymore, but back then it was still possible. And we could extract all of the URLs and then compile a list of websites that a given user on Twitter would visit, has posted on their website. And then we could just match that up with the domains and websites we had in our data. And apply the same technique as I described and see if that actually works. And so we did this here. So here I show like a number of websites that we have extracted for a given user here from the Twitter timeline. So these are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 websites. And the number behind tells you how many occurrences of these websites we have, so how many times they appear in our data set. And you can see some websites are very popular, GitHub, for example, change.org. There are some websites which are very niche, so only a few occurrences of that website, which are therefore more identifying as well. And now if we go to our data and we check how many users, again, visited 0 of these websites, 1, 2, 3, etc., then we can visualize it in this way. So these are like the 100,000 users here as an example, which I have. So each point represents one user, and that here, basically, you can't see the points because there's so many users, but that means that most users in our data set haven't visited any of the domains listed here. And then, like many other users have visited only one domain, many have visited 2 domains, but you can see, like, if you have 3 domains from this list here, the forest thickens, clears out a bit, and you can see like individual users. So like there are less and less users left. And if you repeat this with 4, 5, 6, 7 domains, then in the end, there's again only one data point, one user that has visited all of these domains in our data set. And that's exactly the user that we looked at the Twitter profile belongs to. So that really shows that this technique, just taking the domains from Twitter, comparing them with this data set here, works to identify a single user in a database of like 1 million users as well. And if you say, okay, this is a single website, so it doesn't work for other things as well, maybe, but actually this works for almost any kind of like identifier or any kind of system that you can imagine. We also tried this for YouTube videos. You know, whenever you play a YouTube video in your browser, YouTube also puts the video ID in the URL. We can also extract it from our data set, and we can go, for example, to the public profile of a person, where now it's also not way less common to have that publicly available, but back then people still had their listening or browsing history public on YouTube. You could just compare that again, this time not using domains, but the video IDs, and the result was very similar again. So you can see that if you look at how many people in the data set watched a single video here, for example, from YouTube, or all of these videos, then again, just 9, I think 9 in this case, 9 videos is enough to uniquely identify a user in this data set again. So even your YouTube history betrays your personal identity in such data sets. And lots of other ways. We also looked at geodata. So what you see here is our coordinates from Google Maps data. So whenever you open a Google Maps site in your browser, then Google Maps also puts the latitude and longitude of the map area that you look at in the URL bar. And we have just visualized all of the different points that correspond to the Google Maps URLs that were in our data set. And as I said, like, the data was from Germany, so mostly German users. You can see they're interested in Germany itself, and then of course, like, the nice vacation spots mostly all across Europe. And so this is aggregated for all of the users, but it was available as a per user basis. So you could really see, okay, this user, for example, looked at these, and these map areas in Google Maps. And of course, you can imagine that is also quite revealing because there's a high chance that you will look at, for example, your work location, maybe your home area, or places where you're doing vacation. And there's also ways of extracting such information publicly. You can do it from Facebook. You can do it here from Google Maps. Like, if you look at just the reviews that people have written about places, then you can cross-correlate these different reviews with, like, the activity on the or the maps URLs in our data set, and you can again perform the same kind of re-identification. And for geodata, there are other studies on this, so we didn't look much more into that, but there are other studies which say that even like 3 points are enough in geodata to re-identify a person. So the work location, the home location, for example, and one other location is already identifying enough for almost everyone in a large data set to uniquely identify them. So this also works really, really well. And so this is all rather dread, probably, and you would think, okay, is it, can one ever dream of, like, publishing such highly granular or, like, rich data without risking it being de-anonymized? And from our work and from other works done in the fields, you have to say, like, unfortunately, it's not possible because information or, like, statistics works against you, since there are so many different attributes that can be unique to a person. And with every data point that you publish, you add more information that an adversary, an attacker, can use to re-identify a person in a data set. So unfortunately, publishing highly complex, high-dimensional data and hoping that it will stay anonymous is not a well-funded hope. And so this was well received. There was other work we did in this study. We also identified, for example, members of the German parliament, and then confronted them with their browsing data, which they found not very funny, but I think it taught them a good lesson about data protection and why these laws are important. So there was a lot of uproar in the community about this work back then, but I didn't talk about how this data was actually collected, which was through so-called browser extensions, so like small add-ons that you can add to your browser. They would often, without the users knowing, siphon off your browsing history and then, like, centralize it and put it in use for this data broker. And some of these extensions, when we uncovered them in this work, were shut down briefly, but they all went up again, so they're still collecting data to this point today. So not a good outcome, unfortunately. And even though some of the politicians that we confronted with their data were quite unhappy about that and said, okay, we will definitely investigate that. There was also no official investigation or no investigation launched by the data protection agencies, so nothing really came of this either. And up to this day, browser extensions can still collect vast amounts of this user data. There are some changes. So, for example, Google tries to, like, introduce a new API that will make this maybe a bit more difficult, but it's not very clear if this really will be the case, or if it will just, like, stifle the work actually of other extensions that try to protect your privacy. It's also, I would say, not much positive to say on this side. And other data sources, of course, have risen in popularity in the meantime. So, for example, today there's a lot of activity in the mobile data space. Location data from mobile devices, for example, which is even more sensitive than the clickstream data that we have here, is being collected on a very large scale as well, which is very worryingly today. And I think the one thing that changed, not only as the result of our work, but as the result in general of, like, this kind of, like, stories and, like, the increased awareness of the public, is that data brokers today are even more careful about how they give access to data, and often they will not provide access to the raw data anymore because they have seen it can lead to very bad publicity, very bad risk. The data is still there, it's still being used, but it's held on to more closely, I would say. So in that sense, there was a change, but maybe not the change we hoped for when we did this work. So with that, I hope I could give you some good idea about how to de-anonymize real-world data. I want to thank again Svea and, of course, all the teams. So there were many people involved in this work. And I think now we have some time for discussion as well. So thanks. Good. Let's go here. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Andreas. That was eye-opening. And I don't know how many people in this room would have been aware of that story from 2016 originally. Just to introduce myself, I'm Elaine Burke. I'm a podcaster. I do the For Tech's Sake podcast and a science and technology journalist. I'm not one of the journalists who covered this incredible story back in 2016, but I've read up on it since. And what I want to ask first off is the browser plugin was one that was meant to be for user privacy.
Exactly, yeah. So it's called Web of Trust, and it's paradoxically not specifically for privacy, but for safety online, where it would show you if a given website that you visit is trustworthy, and you could, for example, give your data to it. Paradoxically, it was doing in the background just the opposite, so like siphoning off all of your data itself.
Is that something that, like, you even as a user are skeptical about when you come across various tools online that are promising this and that? Because privacy is something that's of a concern to people, but that also means that it's marketable to people. So there's people trying to get involved in that and make money off of it. So are you very skeptical about any browser plugins, anything like that?
Yeah, way more skeptical than I was before. So I think before that work, I was also using like lots of different open source or free plugins, because I said, okay, there's tools that help you to make screenshots, which actually were also siphoning off data. But what happens is that all of this, everything that generates eyeballs or that captures user attention will get weaponized or monetized to like use this data. So what happened was that a lot of these extensions started out as projects by students, for example, or like just enthusiast developers. They built something cool. They published that, and then it got very popular. Millions of people started using it, and they actually didn't intend to make money with that. But whenever like such a tool or extension reaches a given threshold of audience, then like data brokers or other companies will become aware of it, and they will make offers to these developers and say, hey, do you want to monetize your extension, or can we like maybe buy it from you? And they just acquire, so to say, the eyeballs or like the user attention that they can then monetize and then change to like extract the data from it.
It's a classic business use case. I mean, it was popularized by the idea of Facebook, started up by students who were just trying to put a fun project together for their university or whatever. But what happens is you get enough users and they're unpaid users, so what do you do to turn that into a business? You leverage their data. Like, I think anyone in the tech world is familiar with that, anyone in the business world is familiar with that, but like users are still probably a little bit maybe cavalier about that being a concept. We sign up to free access to things all the time. You said you do it yourself, and sometimes you just need that tool and you hand over your email address. Like, is there like a cultural issue there in that, like, even those of us who are very privacy conscious, just to get access to a free tool, it's very tempting to just hand over the data?
Yeah, I think perception of this changes is changing a bit. There were so many scandals, and like this topic was so popular in media for a long time that people like really, at least in Germany, that's where mostly like observe the public opinion. I think people are very wary about these kind of like models where they say, okay, you pay with your own data, with advertisement for a given service, but curiously, people still use these services, myself included also, because I say, okay, there's no alternative. There's like the network effect, so a lot of people are using a given system like WhatsApp or Facebook, and if you're not there, then it's hard to, for example, keep in touch with people, and so you kind of like sucked into that, just by the popularity, and I think it could be even like a legitimate model to say, okay, we have advertisement that funds the service, you show me some ads, and I can use the service for free. But often, of course, the main problem is that there's not really informed consent about how your data is being used. Also with these extensions, they have all their like terms and privacy terms where they explain, okay, we use your data for privacy marketing purposes, but most users don't even understand what that means, and they like sign something which they don't have any like real understanding of, and then their data is being used in ways which they didn't anticipate. I think that's one of the main problems, is this like knowledge gap between the users on the one side and the companies that are using their data often in ways which users would not be happy about if they really knew what the company would be doing. So.
And I mean, this is essentially driven by marketing, commerce, and e-commerce industry, essentially.
Right.
So it's not that people are doing this and gathering all this data for sinister reasons. It can be weaponized in that way.
Yeah.
But the genuine motivation is they want to sell people stuff, and they want to target advertising at them to sell them stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So
and that graph that you showed, which was very densely populated in 2016, and I'm sure you're right that it has grown, there were some names in that would be household names in terms of technology.
Right.
But there's plenty of names in there that the average person doesn't know that they are constantly interacting with. And we break out the options on their consent forms and the
Right,
GDPR
yeah.
list. And again, they're names that we're not familiar with. Does that obscurity help that industry to operate in this way, where they're probably not, they're not under the same public scrutiny that your big tech firms are under?
Yeah, definitely. So the way I see this is that you have like multiple tiers of these data brokers or services. You know, you have the big platforms, of course, like Google, Facebook, etc., but they're very wary about compliance because they're on under a lot of scrutiny since they're so big. So like the pressure is mounting for them. And I think the main strategy that is employed there is that they provide these technological platforms. So for example, like the browser extension APIs, or like other systems, like the mobile app systems that allow like smaller companies to then publish apps and like extract data there, so that they can themselves have less compliance risks, so to say. So it's a bit like saying, okay, we ourselves, we would never do something like this invasive data collection or so. We have these APIs on our platforms that could allow you to do these things, but we really don't condone anyone like doing that. But if the smaller players are then like doing that for themselves and then like providing this data, so to say, through the second market, to like other companies, then this is way less risky for the big players, of course, and it still creates all of this data that can be used in marketing. So I think this is kind of like by design that we have these platforms which are not very privacy friendly, which have the ability to easily extract personal information and then use that data for marketing purposes, because after our work also, there was a lot of requests for change, for example, in these APIs, and it would not be very difficult to make the APIs in such ways that they're more privacy friendly and that it's harder to extract this data. But surprisingly, even actors like Mozilla or others, they didn't change much the ways of these inner workings. So it seems to be, I mean, we're getting into conspiracy theory territory maybe here, but it seems like this kind of like ability to capture this data, even for privacy-friendly players, seems to be something that is important because, of course, even the privacy-friendly vendors, they still depend on like marketing and advertisement in many cases and personal information processes in the end.
Data is their business model, and that's kind of what creates the problem here. It's a conflict of interest, essentially. Like to actually move your business away from that moves you away from your business model. So like you can see why you're running against that problem. But it is frustrating, especially when there are brands that are marketing themselves as privacy friendly. But even the ones that are, say, just in the ad game and the content that they're collecting on people, and again, like they're not trying to connect the dots and create a data fingerprint like you were able to do with your research, but someone can do that. And are there protections on this data strong enough that if someone decided to infiltrate that data, not even just call them up with a fake identity, like you guys did and successfully did so, but they must be a vulnerable, like they must be a target for hackers. And I think it was an interesting point made repeatedly when there was a lot of paranoia around politicians using TikTok on their work phones. I remember a number of cybersecurity professionals pointing out the fact that that information can be gotten by data brokers already and no one's talking about it.
Yeah, to me it's a bit surprising that not more things or like more scandals happen there, because I think today there are many more avenues of like collecting such data. There's more sensitive data being collected, as I said, location data, IoT data. So this has all risen massively in the last 8 years. And I mean, there are studies or like there are reports that national security agencies are also using this kind of data. So they're enriching their own data set with like commercial or data broker information, like location data, for example, because that's a convenient way of just like getting access to data that you would otherwise have to get yourself. So I think that's also part of the problem. And as I said, like the data brokers today, they seem to have developed more robust internal processes to silo the data and keep it close to themselves and not give it out freely, because that creates, of course, large risk, but it's still there, of course. And if there was, there are certainly actors which have the resources to acquire this data and then put it together to build like a massive database of millions or billions of people. That's why we named our talk like Build Your Own NSA, because back then it seemed, okay, would it be feasible actually to have a database where you have a large fraction of the German population listed and can see various information about people, like just like browsing up someone by name and then saying, okay, well, where's this person eating? What are they doing? What are they interested in? What are their whereabouts? And I think back then it was already possible if you had the economic means for it. I think today it would be even more easy. I don't know if anyone is doing it, but given the data we have, it would definitely be possible. It's just a question of getting at it.
Yeah, because a lot has changed in those 8 years. Yeah. I mean, like the process that you did where you were trying to pinpoint people, it reminded me a bit of these like data forensic investigations you see sometimes covered on television, like fascinating things to watch. And they do these kind of things. They try to create these data fingerprints. They use things like health data and your phone data, obviously, to try and match your location and where you've been. And all of that data is exploding. It's being collected at a greater degree now. And we now have more sophisticated AI. And I agree with Max that, we're not quite there yet with it doing what it promises it can do. But it can do a lot in terms of data analysis. Like, do you think even that kind of process of matching up and filtering through the data would have been easier today than it was then?
Oh, yes, definitely. So I think these powerful new AI models like LLMs that can come through unstructured data like text, even images very easily. I think that's also a game changer for these kind of analysis, because back then we did everything by hand, but now I could imagine that you just set an LLM up with a task, okay, try to extract relevant information or from data from like text that you find in URLs, and then you can just set that up to go through like millions or hundreds of millions of rows of data automatically. And that is work that would have taken many years of manual work that you can just automate now. So of course that also makes it easier to re-identify or like prepare the data for re-identification. So the re-identification techniques themselves, they're rather simple on a statistical level. It's just like matching up attribute values, but so I think for that, AI doesn't change so much, but like the pre-processing step of like getting the data into a structured form of attributes that you can then use these statistical techniques on, I think that's really, that's much easier today than it was 8 years ago. Yeah.
And would you, like even personally as a user when it comes to your own data and stuff like that, are you concerned about your data, personal data, ending up in an LLM and what that means? Because we kind of don't really know what the next step for these things is. They're still very much in an early phase of development.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with the other, I don't think LLM data or like the data that you produce by interacting with LLMs is maybe more problematic than other data sources, because it's more rich and you like really have a conversation with these systems and can sometimes confide them things which are on a very personal level even, I think. So I think people wouldn't type this kind of stuff into like a Google search prompt, but they would write like about themselves and like ask intimate questions maybe to a chatbot, So I think that kind of data is way more problematic in that sense. And it's hard to say where it will end up. In general, like I think there's some movement there to say, okay, we should really do something about this data, it's becoming more and more and more. As you said, like health data is also growing massively. But there's a lot of organizations or people that say, it has always worked like this. So we just strengthen security, we strengthen privacy measures a bit, and then it will be fine. But I personally think, giving 5 or 10 years in the future, we will definitely need a completely different approach to think about this kind of data processing or handling personal data at all, because at some point you can see like the data is growing, the number of companies processing the data is also growing. At some point, something bad will happen. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And with AI and all of these technologies, it's even like hard to estimate what we can do with personal data in like 10 years. So I think we definitely should start worrying about that now a bit more when we still have time.
And one thing that has changed since 2016 is we have all these consent pop-ups. So they are specifically addressing that area of the ad tech industry and the targeting industry. And some are cleaner than others, some are easier to use than others, some are easier to effectively say no to everything than others. So I can't ask you about specific ones because they're also different. But again, as a user yourself, how effective do you think that they are, and do you trust them to do what they're saying they're doing? Because, we were talking earlier about the plugins say they're privacy focused and then maybe they're not. So what are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I think I agree with Max mostly in saying that consent has been also weaponized by this industry mostly to just force, or not force, but like coerce users into clicking yes on buttons. And we've used like this effect of like having consent banners everywhere is just to train people on clicking yes so that they can use the website. In that sense, I think for privacy, it's not, in many cases, not a win because it just lets people give away their consent for data processing, which they can't really fully understand. You talked about like the ad tech industry. There's like this IAB standard, the so-called TCF standard for consent dialogues, where you have a vendor list of these data brokers and ad tech vendors, which is, I think, like a few thousand entries long. And you really expect a user that sees a content banner to go through like a list of 1,000 companies and like look at all of their privacy terms and then decide, okay, I want to do this or I don't want to do this. It's just ridiculous. Maybe with AI it could be possible, but it's just like letting the user themselves choose that. I don't think it's an effective way to respect privacy.
Do you think they've at least helped with the needle moving towards a little bit more awareness of your personal data, your online data, and how it's being used? Because, it's hard to ignore the fact that that is happening when every website you visit is actually asking you, can I do this? We're doing this, can I do it? And do you think like people are moving towards greater awareness there? Probably slowly, but
yeah, maybe. I think the biggest change that is coming right now is again from like the regulatory side. So like the European Union and other regulatory bodies also seeing that problem and trying to like increase the pressure on the big companies. So I think it also comes, of course, from the users themselves that are affected, that are complaining about this. So there's like some movement up, like with NOIB, for example, which is a great organization. Also I think the real change will come again, hopefully, from like regulation, and it's clear that we need more, not less, but more regulation in this space, in my opinion, because the techniques are like advancing at a very fast pace, and the regulation has a hard time keeping up with it.
I do think, though, like you could probably get farther with your regulation if the users are all on side as well. Right. Because if these platforms are then saying to people, oh, we're giving you a worse experience because the EU said we have to, like that is how they phrase it to users. And if they get the users to agree with that, well, then you will struggle as a regulator to drive these things forward. And it's a challenge that I personally have as a communicator on these issues, is trying to get people to care. Yeah. Because it's one thing if you're a politician and you're worried that some compromising information about you might get out and be used against you. Like, it's easier for them to realize the risks here. But the average person will say, yeah, I don't care that they have all my data. What can they do with it? What's the danger there? Yeah. Like, that's a real hard bridge to cross, I find. Do you have that struggle as well? Yeah, definitely. There's kind of like this fatalism, so that you say, okay, whatever, I can't, even if I want to, it's like too difficult to just keep all of my data away from these actors, so I just give in and accept the risk. And as you said, there's also a lot of malicious compliance, as I call it, from these companies. So saying, okay, the European Union or anyone else saying, okay, you have to do this in order to respect user privacy, so please do that. And then the companies do it in a way that also breaks user experience or like creates a much worse user experience to say, oh, we don't actually want to do this, but the EU forces us, we're so sorry about this. And I think that's like, we need to get away from this and to actually understand that there can be really privacy-friendly models for many things where we use personal data and like new ways of handling that. I think it's just like very difficult to move the whole ecosystem from this one state where like personal data is everywhere to a state where we say, okay, we have like anonymous data by default and maybe personal data with exceptions. But you can already see there is some movement. So even from the big tech companies like Google, etc., they have some, they see that there's regulatory pressure and they're trying to invent new ways to
for ad attribution, for example, and there are other smaller players also doing the same thing. Mozilla, for example, is working on that. We can see like a slight shift, but it seems like the status quo is really hard to change, and yeah, I think it will take a bit more, but I'm still optimistic because like technology-wise, we have much better ways to like anonymize or like keep data safely. You know, trusted computing is also something that I'm really positive about. Differential privacy and other anonymization techniques, which don't work for all of the data, but for some cases at least. So I think we still have the possibility to build a new, better ecosystem. It's just like the question of how to move all of the actors there.
Yeah, and to get everyone on board with moving in that direction. I do think on the user side, when they get creeped out, they do realize what's iffy about this, because like it does seem innocuous. It's like, oh, they've gathered all this data, but it's really just to sell you things that you may want to buy anyway. And people seem to be like, oh yeah, okay about that. But then when they start to think that their phones are listening to them to sell them those things, then they are suddenly feeling the invasive nature of it.
Right.
And I've talked to countless experts on this who have said they're not listening, but then you have, there is reports of a marketing firm actually saying, we can do this.
Yeah.
We can use audio collected data to target your advertising.
Right, yeah.
So there's obviously still a level of dishonesty happening there in the industry, that like there are things we don't know, and even the experts thought that this wasn't happening, and then
right, yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff going on. You know, like with this clickstream data, also the company said like, oh, we have this, but it's strictly anonymized. It's no way to piece it back together, and in reality, it's just like a big, slightly de-identified data set, so to say, that is very easy to work with. And I'm sure there are a lot of other examples where companies are actually processing data while they're saying like, we don't.
So in the midst of that, like call for regulation and stuff like that in this industry, do you think like more transparency when it comes to ad tech, and even an education of the public on ad tech, what it is and what it's doing all the time, would be a good contributor here?
Yes, definitely. Though I think the system is so complicated right now that I'm not sure if you could even like if it's worth trying like to get everyone about like the exact mechanisms there. I think what's more important is to just say, okay, this kind of like invasive data tracking is. It's unlawful. We shouldn't do that. You know, there's like a certain point to which, beyond which we shouldn't like go. You know, when it comes to efficiency. So that saying, okay, collecting very intimate personal data just to gain like a few after the 0.1% on conversion efficiency, it's maybe something where we should really need a like regulation saying, okay, you can't do that, so that we have a level playing field for everyone. Because right now, companies gain an advantage if they collect more data and if they're doing more invasive stuff. You know, so if you could really enforce this playing field, that's also a big problem, because like a lot of the players are not in the European Union. So this data broker that we got the data from was also outside of the EU. So it's hard to get hold of them, to like really sanction them for data abuse. But if you could have like such a playing field, then it would be one way to solve this. But
that's really troubling, actually. It's the same issue in cybersecurity, when, you know, people in Ireland may be affected by cybercrime, but the people impacting it are out of the jurisdiction of the police force that's investigating it. It's a real challenge, and obviously will be a challenge here as well. I hadn't even thought of that one. Now, before we wrap up, I think it would be worth mentioning that KIProtect is one company that's trying to work towards better privacy and anonymization for users online. Can you tell us a bit about what KIProtect is doing there?
So we're basically helping companies that are really interested in privacy, that want to enforce privacy standards, to like implement technical privacy measures like pseudonymization, anonymization. So basically helping you to work with the data and at the same time also keep it privacy compliant and do it in a privacy-friendly way.
And how are you finding that challenging to develop these tools? Like, is it just like you just have to put the effort in?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's definitely challenging, you know, especially with high-dimensional data. So like everyone wants to work with very complex data, of course, like very rich data. But the more complexity in the data, the more difficult it is to get anonymization working. And at some point, I'd have to just say it's impossible to properly anonymize data, and you have to find different ways. But it's always like a mix of technology and legal and organizational measures that can give you a good solution overall for processing data. But yeah, there's no like silver bullet, so to say, like anonymization. Unfortunately, I wish it would, but anonymization can't work for all of the data.
Which is a good promotion of the position of least privilege when it comes to taking data in the first place. Thank you so much, Andreas. That was a great chat we had there. Hope you all enjoyed it.